Welcome, Tawandra. All right, it's 1:05. Welcome to the Active Teaching Lab, and welcome. We have now been in fall semester for one whole week. And what's happened? I want to ask anyone to share, open up with by sharing an experience that they had this last week that they feel was surprising or was a challenge for them. And you can raise your hand or just unmute your mic and start sharing with us. That would work as well. Uh-oh, somebody undid everything. Thanks for putting it back. That's why we have version control on the Google Docs. All right. Okay, so today's theme is challenges in hybrid synchronous instruction. And as we were putting this together, we thought, well, hybrid, what does hybrid mean, right? Does anyone have a good idea of what hybrid means to you? Because what it means to me is doing both. Something, it's sort of like blended. We have material that is happening online. And I guess where I think of blended learning, I think of blended as asynchronous. And somebody can jump in and fix that for me because it might not be, I might be wrong about that, right? Let me stop sharing my screen here. So I think of hybrid education or hybrid learning, hybrid instruction as what happens when we have some face-to-face and or some online. It's sort of this, a little bit of both. All right, you learn. Hybrid synchronous sounds like some in the room and some online, right? So in the case of this fall semester, you might have some students that want to sort of phone in, and you might have some students that are like, I want to be in the class, and I know that there are several models that are doing that, and there might be some on campus here as well that I don't know the answer to it or not. As we were looking at the activity sheet and putting it together, I sort of hedged and said, well, let's look at both and sort of broaden it. After this first week, after we now have our undergraduate population on lockdown because hundreds of them have COVID-19, there might be some challenges beyond just this hybrid as well. So Jerome says that's his experience. You've got both students classroom and online. And I want to invite you, Jerome, to share about that, because here's what I had, my experience with that. With the active teaching labs last year, or the last couple of years, we've tried to do both online, so people can live stream it, and face-to-face people in the room. And I found as an instructor, it's really hard to give equal footing to both. So how do you manage to do that?
Well, the answer for me is not very well. I haven't found the right blend yet, and there's some strict technology issues in the classroom right now. The students are really far apart. So my microphone on my computer, or even if I stream on Blackboard Collaborate, my microphone does not pick up what students are saying. I ask students to turn on the microphone before speaking. A lot of them just simply forget, so the people who are away or remote miss on half of the conversation. I've tried doing breakout groups for both the students in class and those who are remote, and that turned out to be extremely frustrating for the students who are in the classroom because they could hear everybody talking, they could hear themselves. So those in the classroom ended up sort of trying to congregate and speak face-to-face while other people were speaking through their computer to someone away. So it's just really challenging.
It was chaos.
Yeah.
So the good news is that it's chaos for everybody, and your students aren't alone in feeling that. I think that I was talking to some K-12 parents who were talking about the experience that their kid was having in the K-12 classroom, and they said, wow, it's so much better this fall than it was in spring. And I think that that's probably the way that it's going to be going. This week was kind of, didn't work so well. Next week, we're going to figure out a few better things to do to make the experience better. 2 weeks after that, we'll figure out other ways to make it better. So that's a great sort of introduction to some of the challenges. I love that sort of as a concrete story. So we're going to talk about more. What are some of the other challenges that we have? I invite you again to look at the activity sheet here, the link in the chat, and I just want to walk through sort of the parts of it. Here are some quick ideas that I have sort of spitballed out there. If you've been to previous active teaching labs, you'll see that a lot of these are sort of standard talking points at this point. The first one, you're in this weird pandemic situation and you're teaching in it and nobody else has ever done this, in everybody's new at it. It's all new. We're all coming up with new ideas. So acknowledge that. Don't even try to teach the way that you've taught in the past because it's a different situation. It might come off as weird that you're not acknowledging that we're in this weird situation. The good thing is your students, if you embrace this, you can say, hey, you students are getting a chance to learn in a situation that none of the other past students have had a chance to do, right? So it's really kind of a specialized advanced learning, if you will, because you're in this very real, very authentic problem that the world is facing, and you're getting to say, what does my discipline or my field or whatever the course content is look like in this situation? There'll be plenty of time to look, hopefully, to look at later on when things get back to normal. I'm using air quotes here because maybe there will never be a normal, but things will hopefully settle in and then you're on the vanguard. So just jump on that and be like, wow, we're on the vanguard. Students, help me with that. Because of that, you've got to be flexible, right? And I'm realizing that I'm not sharing my Chrome tab here with you. Now I'll make it for you to read. And that should help you be able to follow along if you're in the Blackboard Collaborate window instead of on the other the Google Doc window. So be flexible because things are changing. As we just found out during lockdown, less than a week into the fall semester, things have changed. Guess what? Probably going to change again. So what things you can do for your course in your course design to sort of inoculate or to build in some flexibility for you to be able to navigate those spaces. And building in that flexibility as much as you can squeeze it in will help because you might need to call, to pull that flexibility and use it later on. This is one of the big ideas that I have, and this is what the Active Teaching Lab is based on, this idea of sharing what works and what doesn't work, what your experiences are, recognizing that you might have had a really terrible experience doing something, but it might be perfect for somebody else to use in their situation. So sharing all ideas, the failures as well as the success, because we can find value and use in both of those. Ask your colleagues, which is what we do in the Active Teaching Lab, but also ask your students. And I'll get to this later on today. Your students are in 4 or 5 courses right now, right? So they're seeing 4 or 5 different ways of doing what you're doing. You're just one of those ways, and you don't have it into your students, into those classes, right? But it's not just 4 because it's 4 times however many students you have, so there's hundreds of classes that are your students know about and are experiencing collectively, right? In those hundreds of classes, there may be some really good ideas that you don't know about that your students are like quietly, because students don't give up information without being asked, and they're sitting there going, gosh, I wish that they do like what Professor blah 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 is doing, because that's way better than this. But you don't know what that professor is doing unless you ask them. So ask them and have them share that. Another big tip: over communicate. Right? Um, we miss out on so many things because of this digital distance. Because I cannot see all of your faces right now. You know, at best I can see a few icons and very small pictures of your face, so I know that your name, you know, I can match your names and faces together, which is good, but it doesn't tell me whether you're listening. It doesn't tell me whether you're engaged. It doesn't tell me whether I'm um, speaking to a vacuum or if you're getting anything or not. So to make up for that, I want to repeat. I want to over communicate. I want to say things over and over in multiple formats um, so that they get it. And it might feel like you're over communicating, but you're not. You're you're doing what you need to do. All right, blend possible. So if there are things that you're doing in your face-to-face course that you could do online, well, move it online. Um, Move it online so you get experience doing that and they get used to it. So if you go all online later on in the semester, they'll be used to it. And two, save that precious face-to-face time where you can see their faces and they can see each other and they can turn and talk to each other, although you can't see your faces underneath a face covering oftentimes. But there's still nonverbal things that are lost in the digital environment. If you have the opportunity to use that in a face-to-face environment, take advantage of that and get all of the stuff that you can do online out of there and just capitalize on the opportunities of face-to-face, because it's increasingly precious, right? All right, and then the last one is anything that's in your high stakes exams, take those out. If they don't need to be time-based, for example, and they don't need to be in your high stakes exams because they're just sort of extra things to fill out the hour and a half of test taking or whatever your time period is, take those out, put them in low stakes quizzes. If your student wakes up that day, and remember, hundreds of them now have COVID-19, if they wake up that day and they're sick, but they're still going to take the course because that's what we do as humans oftentimes, they're going to not do as well as they could if they had several low stakes assessments that added up. So the same number of points, they just are broken into smaller groups. And that way, if there's that 1 or 2 days where they aren't high end, they aren't fully on, you know, in their state of mind, or something happened, or they just found out about a relative or a roommate or something, and they're not able to operate at peak potential, that's okay. It was I can't operate on peak potential at a 5-point quiz versus I can't operate at peak potential at a 50% of my grade exam. So take those things out. So those are the first big 6 things that I have, and there are other ideas that I'm looking forward to hearing from you all today. I want to stop and open it up right now. Are there any thoughts or responses, ideas, um, any affirmations, any arguments against those 5 or 6 things? Any thoughts? Does anyone have any experience with any of these that they'd be willing to share? And again, you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in. Yeah, Tom.
I would definitely affirm the over communicate bit. That's something my students have been asking me to do, and that I know that's something you've been talking about a lot in the active teaching lab, is shortening the feedback loop of you and your students. And so we've already sent out, 2 surveys in the class of what's going well, what's going wrong, what can we do better, and overwhelmingly the students are saying, I want to hear more. And I thought we were already over communicating, and they're like, no, give us more.
Yeah. it's hard to get lost. And I think that because we are getting so much information and it's hard to keep track of things, and ideally ideally we would just get the communication that we need, but it turns out that we get all kinds of communication, and so I don't know the best way to do that other than to say, I don't know what people want or don't want, so I'm going to give it to them. And if they need it, they need it. If they don't need it, they can hit delete, scan delete.
Yeah. We started sending out emails, Canvas messages, and announcements, and so far that's been working. But it's also contributing to the dearth of communication. So I feel a little bit bad about that, but selfishly it's nice because my communication gets there.
And I think that it's okay to make this mistake right now, because eventually we're going to come up with a better way of doing this, and we'll learn more about what is important and what's not important. I don't know. I guess I'm a technology optimist or a teaching practice optimist, and we'll figure this out. But right now it's all new. We got to go through the process of making the mistakes. So it's okay, right? And maybe that was one of the other ones. That's part of be flexible, is be kind to yourself, because you are going to make mistakes, as I do all the time, and that's all right. And that's going to be hard for people who've been teaching in the classroom for a long time and who have had it figured out, because they're back to that novice learner stage for this teaching practice, right? It's new for them too. They're not already experts, many of them. If they are, bless them, they should be here sharing their expertise. All right. So if no other questions are, let's just get the question or challenges here. All right, we've got one. This one was from JT, and he had to go out and teach, so he put it in there that we can respond to it. And that was engaging remote groups effectively in online breakout groups. All right, so this is a really good one. Raise your hand, I guess, if you have been in the situation where you send out breakout groups and then you're like, I wonder what they're talking about. I hope that they're talking about the things that I wanted them to talk about. It's hard to jump into, if you have 10 breakout groups, to even navigate I want to go join group one, and then you go join group one, and as soon as you get into that group, everyone shuts up, right? Because, oh my God, the instructor's here. This happens in face-to-face as well, right? They're having a big conversation. You show up to listen to see what they're talking. All of a sudden, it's crickets, right? So how do you engage them effectively? How do you know with what's going on? Things like that. So one of the ideas on the top here that I really love, you can encourage them to use the chat and microphone. That often doesn't happen, right? Even here, where you're all engaged in the Google Doc, you're not really jumping in and chatting a lot, and that's okay, but that means your students aren't going to either. Using polling, that's the thing that I've never really figured out how to use or gotten good at using, or I don't know, maybe I'm just not sure what questions I would be. The whiteboard, polling and the whiteboard are both things that Karen Skiba and Karen Spader do really well in their Teach Online course and the Preparing to Teach Online course. One of the things that I really love that I've seen them do as well is using Google Docs like we are, but also Google Slides. So using Google Slides is a really great way to do a couple of things. One, you can give your students breakout group, have a set of Google Slides for you got 10 breakout groups, you've got 11 slides. On slide 1 is the instructions, and slide 2 is group 1. Slide 3 is group 2. So I guess you don't need the title one if you put the prompt on every slide, but then the students just go into that group, right? So they're in breakout group 1, they go to the slide for group 1, and there's the question, and there's the response. Now, as an instructor, it's very easy to go into slide by slide by slide and jump around to see, are they writing stuff? Are they not writing stuff? Is it empty? If it's empty, you can jump in the chat message or leave a comment on their slide and say, hey, I don't see any ideas here yet. What you guys talking about? You got any? Don't forget to put ideas down here. And that way you can kind of see all of those things. So one, it's easy for you to do. Number two, it's persistent, right? We had talked a little bit about with the recordings and the chat messages here on the side of the Blackboard Collaborate, for example. It's really hard to sort of save that chat. So if you try to capture things in chat, it doesn't work as well. It's much easier to open up a Google document or a Google slide and say, oh yeah, this is what we talked about. You could even say our groups. Now, after this face-to-face brainstorming thing that we did synchronously, go into this again and come back next week and have it polished into a proposal. Do some research on what you talked about. Whatever, it's a persistent thing, so they can take those slides, those that they roughed up, and turn them into something really polished for the next class period, for example. All right, and then yes, I'm glad somebody's got those roles. Like oftentimes we will say, well, I don't know what to do or how to do it, but if you say, all right, your job is to be the leader, your job is to be the reporter, even those administrative roles, you're the timekeeper, to keep things on track. I've always hated those roles, but they're useful for sort of keeping people on track. You can also give roles like you're going to be opposed to everything that somebody says. You're going to be an advocate for it. You're going to be, I don't know, give them roles in your field as well, and say, look at it from a surveyor. You look at it from an assessor. You look at it from a real estate client. What are the different perspectives that you would use in that case? So roles are a really good one as well. All right, and that was, I think I just talked about that one. Yep. Make sure that they have a task and that the task is clear is a really big one. Good. Any other on this first point before we move on to the second one? All right, the next challenge then. How to evaluate? Oh, I heard somebody raise their hand, right? No, it's in chat. Excellent. If you share a Google slide in a Chrome, all right, so this is interesting. In presenter mode, it doesn't live update. I did not know that. Thanks for confirming that, Karen, as well. So good. Presenter mode. Okay, that's if you upload it, correct? I think that's if you upload it. All right, how to evaluate student participation for synchronous weekly discussions when trying to be understanding of the pandemic. Right. Participation is really difficult in a synchronous situation for a couple of reasons, right? If you made them all turn on their camera and then you sort of assess them by how well they're looking into the camera and nodding and smiling, what does that do? That doesn't give you a lot. It forces them to show you what the back of their learning space looks like, and they might be embarrassed about that. So maybe you don't want to do that. Trying to keep track of what's happening in chat while you're also facilitating other things, really difficult, right? So what are the ways to assess that student participation? Some of those ways we talked about up above in the answers to the how to engage. And I see that we've got an example of it right here. So you can have an activity sheet or a worksheet, and if you don't know the Google /copy option, it's kind of a neat, it's a really neat trick. So whenever you see a Google Doc and the URL at the top of it, of course, in editing mode, if you take that /edit and you replace it with /copy, then whenever they click on that link, it'll ask them, would you like to make a copy? And so you can have all of these prompts for the worksheet that you want to give them, and they'll get their own version of it, and then you set that up as a for them to submit it as a Google assignment as well. Karen, you've got a lot of experience with this.
I was going to comment on that. I was going to comment on the main question about how to evaluate student participation for synchronous weekly discussion meetings when trying to be understanding of the pandemic. So one of the things that I hear from a lot of faculty too is they have these synchronous sessions, but not everybody can attend, and we want to have, to give participation points because that's important and that encourages people to attend. But for those who can't attend, what I usually do is I share the webinar link and then I ask them to reflect on what they learned from listening to the webinar. So that way, if they couldn't make it, they at least have an opportunity to watch the webinar, but also do something with that, such as reflect on what they learned or something specific that you could have them do as a follow-up from watching that webinar, so they're not penalized for for something that maybe they simply couldn't be there for some reason, but yet that they could still participate. The only negative part is they can't, of course, hear any of the things that are going on in the group activity. So maybe what you could do is have a smaller version of whatever that group activity was that they could answer a question or do something so they could make up those points. So I just wanted to comment on that.
That's a really good nod to the idea of universal design for learning, which has the three tenets are multiple means of representation. So how do you represent the content in multiple ways? Multiple means of engagement and multiple means of expression. And the expression is how can students participate? And especially during the pandemic, like if I've got COVID-19 and I'm sick and I want to be involved in class, but I just can't be online right now participating, what can I do as an alternate to be able to earn the points? And maybe not all the points, right? Maybe there is a little penalty for not doing the main thing, but can I make up 80% of them in an online synchronous chat, for example, afterwards? Think about that and think about what are the options that you can give your students. And ask around. Ask other people what they do. Ask your students if they have ideas as well. All right. Again, task to complete. Give them a list of ideas, but again, ask them for a list of ideas as well. What are the things happening in other classes? What ideas are they seeing in other classes? Self-assessment. The first semester I ever taught back in '99, I had my students self-assess their project, and boy, they hated that. I was like, great, turn in your project and then grade yourself and tell me why you deserve the grade that you got. Boy, they hated that. But they did it, and they were preparing to be teachers. It was a useful thing for them to start having that sort of self-reflection on it as well. Got a follow-up question. How do you encourage students to participate within the lecture process or progress without having to wait until the end for them to complete a task? How do you maintain the lecture? How do you keep it engaging and interactive? One of the big ways to do this that I feel, and again, there's 30 participants here, I'd encourage you to raise your hand and jump in with your thoughts as well. Break it up into small pieces and give them something to do in between. One of the things that I've done for the class that I teach this next semester, so a lot of my students are here right now as participants, is we've got a bunch of little 1 to 3 minute videos, and those are the questions, or those are like the question text, and then there's a quick question after each one. So for a lecture, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to lecture at you for a long time on a predetermined topic, and your job is to stay engaged and to smile and nod and do whatever, I'm saying, I'm just going to record this stuff, break it up into small sections, and then I give you a quick knowledge check after each 1 to 3 minute video. So each video has 1 point in it. After each point, I give you a knowledge check, and that way you can kind of keep them on board, and they can check to see, am I getting it or am I not getting it, without going through all 50 minutes, as you say, and then saying, huh, I didn't get that. So small chunks. Small chunks is also really better for bandwidth and in a pandemic situation. All right. Yeah, Yulia.
have a follow-up question. Just
Great.
I find the idea of like asking students to self-evaluate really interesting. But I'm kind of wondering, to be blunt, I feel like that can be affected by like self-confidence
Yep.
and you know, whether over or under or whichever. You know, people don't always have a very clear
Understanding of what good
idea,
is.
understanding. Yeah, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
wondering like how that works. And to
Really.
answer Karen's question, Dr. Escobar's question, yes. But at the same time, like I've given discussion rubrics before, and I've only TA'd a few classes, so I don't know if I just need to like revise those rubrics. But like I've had both students who participated a lot go, oh, I don't feel like I'm participating enough, and
Right.
people who spoke like once in like 5 weeks and going, I'm really great at
Yep. Great.
participation and like I deserve an A and I don't understand why like I'm not getting full points.
Right. These are excellent points, and you've probably noticed, well, and you have, you've noticed that, well, one of the things that I've noticed is that when we do peer evaluation, we tend to be really nice to our peers, right? Especially if they know that John is doing the evaluation. I'll be like, oh, Yulia, you did a great job. You know, I agree with you. Thumbs up. But if I were to evaluate myself, I'm generally going to be harder on myself and be like, I probably could have done better. And if you think about any paper that you've ever written, by this, well, not any paper, but by the time you're in grad school, any paper on the topic that you're interested in that you've written, you've got to like get it pried from your hands because you're not quite done with it yet. Oh, maybe just a little bit more reworking, right? There's always this sort of, I can do things better. I kind of feel like part of the having students self-assess gets them to start thinking about, well, what am I doing as much as I can? Am I doing too much? And even having that question helps them understand a little bit about that. Keep in mind that students cannot grade themselves, right? You have to grade as an instructor. It's your job to grade them. So my students would say, oh, I deserve an A because of da 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 da, and I could respond back and say, how about a B plus because you didn't da 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 da, or they could say, oh, I probably got a B because I didn't do this or I didn't do that, and I could go, yeah, but you did that, and example, and so I'm giving you an A. So there's that. All right, we've got Kelly and another person. Go ahead, Kelly, first.
I wanted to jump in and say something about self-evaluation. So I've done them in the past when we've been in person. And to answer Karen's question, I always provide a rubric. And I'm thinking they're going to be especially important this semester because I don't have the advantage of like knowing students like face to face and in person. And so I suspect there's going to be like a lot going on behind the scenes that where they're participating that I don't know about. And so I see them as kind of an opportunity for students to make an argument or make a case of like why they believe they should have the grade they do. And I'm thinking this semester it makes the most sense to rather come at them with like an already made rubric is to instead come at them with like a draft of a rubric and absolutely have them tell me, to your point about like what's going well in your other classes, like what are some other ways that other people are measuring participation that makes the most sense for you?
Excellent. And by doing that, you're giving them some ownership in their learning, right? You're empowering them to sort of say, am I learning? Am I not learning? What constitutes learning for me? And I think anytime that they have those self-reflections, it's a good metacognitive exercise. Dan, go ahead.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. I really like what Kelly just said. First off, having them write the rubric to kind of define what the students themselves see as effective participation, especially given how dynamic and fluid the situation is where the students are in as far as the class, and then some of them may be participating differently from others. And I also want to add that I've seen I think self-reflective writing, which you mentioned, is it's self-participation and should be built into this. So if you ask students to self-assess their participation, you also ask them to justify it, explain, talk about what did they learn through their participation, what did they learn from others, and what do they feel that they did a good job of explaining to others, things like that, and what would they like to do to improve. And that self-reflection, that self-assessment of what they've done actually is itself the thing that you can grade, because you can really see quality coming through that. And so it's not just yeah, I did great, but I did great because, and then if they can explain, or I didn't do so well because, and they can explain, that self-reflective writing is itself a big essential part of learning. And I think that's where you can really focus in this kind of context that we're in on assessing participation.
Excellent point. One of the big things in learning sciences is distributed learning, right? So every time that your students look at the content and think about the content, like that's a plus. If you just do a one and done, I did the assignment and I'm done with it, and I don't visit it again, that's not going to be as deep of a learning experience as if I do something, some time passes, I think about it, some time passes, I revisit it, some time passes, and that self-reflective piece of what did I learn? Is it useful for me? Is it going to help me on my path or not? How can it? Those are the kinds of questions that really make things stick, I guess, in many ways. All right, Lauren has a point she wants to jump in. In her opinion, it's her opinion that rubric templates work great for larger projects, but for participation in class sessions, if you're using a rubric, I would lean more towards the single point rubric. Lauren, can you give us an example of like a question on a single point rubric for participation? Like, what does that question
single
look
point
like?
rubric has just the outcomes that are expected, the criteria, kind of as a middle column. And on one side, you can, you actually would write in what strengths the student has. And on the other side, you can write in how they would do better. So when you're talking about participation, it kind of, what that outcome is that you're looking for that you put in the middle kind of depends on the situation itself. But the difference is that if you look at that template that was posted, that's got all kinds of criteria and like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of descriptors to assess to what extent they've completed that criteria, and it's just a much bigger thing than what I think you would typically use on an everyday discussion or participation kind of grade.
Yeah, and with anything, these things can be very complicated or very simple depending on what your individual goals are. So it can scale up, and some things might fit your personality in your class, and some things might not fit your personality in class. Excuse me one moment here. I got dog hair in my drink somehow. Ugh. Okay. Any other questions on that, self-assessment and participation? All right, very good. Another question. We have 2 students who have no recorded Canvas activity for my asynchronous course and who are not responding to emails. Yeah, what happened? What do we do with the students who ghost? Really good response here. It's up to them. You can do your due diligence. I guess somebody probably knows something about this with student affairs. Is there anything we need to do with student affairs and student life to sort of alert them to that? I don't know the answer to that, but there's something in the back of my brain that says that we should connect with the dean of students about that. Tom, you might have some insight.
Yeah, there's a form. I forget exactly what it's called, but I've had to fill it out before. Hopefully somebody knows the name.
All right. We're going to have to Google. All right, Nicole knows the form. Thanks.
Awesome.
Nicole, can you find the form on the wisc.edu website and excellent, and then put it in there? Yay! This is why I love having interactive participants. Thank you all for doing that. Excellent. All right, and then Karen's got a simpler rubric for discussion as well. Good. Thanks. We're going to put that link to that form. Oops, here as well. All right, next question. Some students overuse chat. What does that mean? Who wrote that question? And what do you mean by overuse chat? And others complain, about the chat being overused. Right, sharing memes and jokes. I got that. People are using chat for frivolous means, purposes. I do that sometimes, and I get in meetings, and I get scowled at, I think. I feel like I get scowled at. Maybe I don't. Maybe people are just being quiet. They're not laughing. That's the problem. But yes, all right. And also, on the counter side, students use chat to continue a discussion after the face-to-face thing. That was awesome. But unexpected, because I'm used to students use chat to ask me questions. All right, so this is kind of a neat thing. You are finding that students are using chat in ways that you didn't expect them to use it, both for sharing memes and jokes, which can sometimes be inappropriate, but sometimes it's also appropriate because it's what they would do in a face-to-face situation, right? They joke with each other, with a person sitting next to them sometimes. They will, we used to pass notes back and forth to each other. They are on their own chat, back and forth with each other on their phones. The difference is that here you have one chat system, and it's public to everybody else. And so the people, instead of being in sort of a private chat with me and the person who gets my jokes are being exposed to people who don't get it. And so that they get upset about that. All right, how do we solve that problem? Is there a solution? I like this one. Perhaps those who don't like the chat can turn off the notifications for them. So yeah, if you don't like what's happening in the chat, just turn them off. That's very good. Ethan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, kind of building off of what you just said, I think one thing we could do is just teach them how to do private chats, because I do think there's something to be said having those small conversations and building that rapport, but they might not know that they can privately chat within the platform.
Yep, and that's great. And recognize that they are already also doing private chats as well. So they've got their phone sitting next to them that they're on, or they've got another window open where they're talking behind your, there's a back channel that's happening now, especially in the online environment, that's happening, and you can't be part of it. You won't be part of it because they're talking about you and you don't want to be part of it. That's okay. So good. All right, any other questions about chat? And Karen Skiba has a really great idea in our chat session here, ironically. You should explain what is expected or what is not expected in your course communication policy. Now that's a really good spot to have things like, please use netiquette, keep things civil, don't be a jerk, Think twice about posting that snarky comment. Do you really need to do that? Is it helpful, or is it nice, helpful, and necessary, or the three things? Something like that. So yeah, let's get the students involved in that. And get the students involved in that. That's the other thing, because they can explain if they're involved in making it, then it's not you passing on some decree from high, but it's them sort of saying, all right, here are our shared expectations. And so that's kind of a nicer thing. All right, excellent. Next question, some trouble with audio feedback in the in-person classroom. Oh yeah, that's going to get better, right? We're going to figure that out eventually. And the students who are talking at their computer speakers will eventually get their headphones and headset, and that'll get better. I think that's sort of we're just trying to figure out what happens. Like the idea of a feedback loop is concerning sometimes. We don't have it figured out yet, but we will. We'll figure it out. You can make suggestions to them to get a headset or a good microphone with noise canceling, echo canceling, but those are more expensive. Headset's cheaper option. Ooh, and this is a classroom setup, so you are actually in the classroom. In-person classroom. I'm sorry, I read past that too quickly. I have no experience with that. Does somebody who has been in classroom with the mic setups that they have a good answer for this? I have not been in any of these new physically separated classrooms. Jerome has, though. Jerome, thank you.
Well, I don't know that it's exactly the same setup, and I think every room is going to be slightly different because the positions of the speakers in the room can really impact how much the students' computers will pick up the feedback from those speakers in the room. I found that often simply turning down the volume on the room speakers, even just a little bit, sometimes makes enough of a difference that the feedback stops. Or in certain cases, you simply have to temporarily mute those speakers. If you are not yourself using your microphone or playing media for your students, then mute the room speakers if the students are required to participate online and use their own computer's microphones.
Okay. So I just added another thought to it. Play around and report back what works. Okay, this is a great opportunity. Again, it's all new. It's new for you. You've never done it before. It's new for your students. Chaos ensues. Great class problem solving thing. All right, students, how are we going to solve this problem? It's not working for you. It's not working for me. What are the solutions? One of your students will be a brilliant closet audio technician, and they will come up with a solution that you hadn't thought of, or they'll say, oh, the problem is here, and that'll fix it. It'll all miraculously be fixed. And then your job is to come back to the lab and say, hey, my student fixed this. Boom, problem solved, right? Good. All right, I've been unable to access my recorded Blackboard Collaborate sessions. And that is, yeah, Jerome, go ahead.
That was actually my post, and I saw the response, and my issue is that they simply don't show up in that menu. So I don't see anything in the menu. I don't know if it's because I didn't set it up correctly in the first place, but it just doesn't appear.
All right, let me jump in and I'll show you. And this will be good for those who have not seen this yet.
John, he may not have allowed download. He may not have allowed that in the settings as well.
Okay.
So you may have to show that part of it. Do you know how to do that?
You can step me through it, right? Wait,
yeah, in the settings. In the settings, if you don't allow for recordings, they will not show up. But luckily, even if you forgot to do that and you recorded the settings, it will do that retroactively. So he may have just forgot to set up the settings part of it.
All right, so here we are in Blackboard in our Canvas course, under Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. We open that up, and there's the hamburger menu that Karen or somebody was talking about in the response there, and there is the recordings button. So here
Right, but
are
you have
the
to go into
questions.
settings first. So before you do that, go back and go to the settings on your recordings in your actual settings there, and click on that.
I click on recordings.
Well, actually, it would be under settings, but it's not go on recordings yet. But actually, when you're setting, it won't show now because you already set up the settings. But there's a place where you actually, there you
edit
go,
settings
edit
here.
settings, right? So you
Okay,
may have
so I
already
set up
had that clicked. Yes.
room. Got guest access, lock course room. Got some more session settings here. This is the one that you're talking about, right?
Right,
Allow
allow
recording downloads.
recording downloads and allow, yes.
All right.
And so you have to make sure you have that set, and you might already allow recordings. You already have that checked, so it won't show up again. So in your settings, just make sure that you allow recordings. It won't show here now because you already did that. I found that out the hard way too. So just make sure in your settings that you allow recording downloads and allow recordings. And then when you go back, you'll find those recordings.
All right. And a big hint with any of these things that you haven't figured out yet, click on the hamburger menus, click on the ellipsis menus and the kebab menus and all of the other food-related menu things that you might not think to click on. Go ahead and click on them because there are hidden wonders there. All right. We've got 4 minutes left and a couple more questions here. Oh, we might not get through them. I'll go through these very fast then. Looking for the perfect mix. You and me both, right? I don't know the answer to that. It's, as far as I know, there is no perfect mix yet, but maybe someday there will be. But here's the thing. One person's utopia is another person's hell. What might be a perfect mix for you might be terrible for one of your students. So offer lots of options for mixes, easy listening and smooth jazz. All right, how to create a digital space that promotes a sense of safety to share and collaborate. It's tougher to empower the students through the digital medium. In some ways, that's absolutely right. If it's not anonymous, if I have my name associated with it and my face associated with it, I might not be so willing to share my deep inner secrets. On the other hand, if I'm totally anonymous, I might turn into an internet troll, right? So how do we have that balance between I want to be able to be anonymous, but also be held accountable for the things that I say? I often point people to Piazza for that purpose because it lets students be anonymous with each other, but the instructor can see who says what. And you can say to the students, I know who you are, but you're anonymous to each other, so feel free to ask those dumb questions because you won't lose sort of the social capital with each other. And we've got more in there, but Lauren, thank you for jumping in there with that. How to engage virtual learners? It is tough. You might offer them an opportunity to turn their camera on for a little bit of the time, maybe at the beginning, have a little social moment at the beginning of the course. Try not to require students to have their camera turned on because some of them just might not be up for that and be able to do that. Karen Skeba, go ahead. Oh, was that that was from earlier, wasn't it? All right, never mind. I saw your hand up. And figuring out how to get people to unmute themselves and participate, that is a challenge everywhere. Reconsider what participation is. So there haven't been a lot of folks talking here in this lab, for example, but there is a lot of stuff happening in the Google Doc, right? And there's stuff happening in the chat. So between those three different formats, the audio, the chat, and the Google Doc, there's a lot of participation happening here. So that counts. All right, frustrated by the lack of control of the understanding, and it's harder to to connect with students in this format, that says it all. It is as well. Yeah, I think that we're all learning about that and we're going to get better at it. But it's kind of a give it some time because it's got to happen. I will tell you that one way to do that is to empower them, ask them to participate, make them participate, make them contribute their ideas, ask for their opinion, and then act on that opinion. And they'll say, oh, my instructor cares about me and cares about what my ideas are. And once they feel that, the trust increases. It's 2 o'clock. That's all we have time for today. I see that there are a couple more questions here that we have not gotten to, but I want to let you all go. If you're part of my Leveraging Technology to Teach class, we're going to stop the recording now, and then in 10 minutes at 2:10, we're going to come back in this room, and we will have a class.